and I am reaching out to you today from a lovely summer afternoon room, the famous Zai, which is also one of the projects of the group. Today is going to be very interesting. I know it is Friday afternoon, so everybody is really looking forward to go home. And if you're working from home, you are, I think, ready to stop your week and enjoy your lovely weekend. So I do hope that we can all put a very nice taste and end to our week. Today we are going to have a very special guest, Angelika Berger-Sodian, my friend and my colleague and my collaborator. She's doing very interesting things about mobility, and she's very aware of what's going on in the global scheme. So she will be sharing her ideas that she put in her new book. But before we do that, I think I should introduce you what we are trying to do to all together in Fark Labs, as our company is looking into the vision and looking for esteemed collaborators. Cemre, can you help me to share the screen? So in our holding company, we are all working towards a better future together. That's our goal. So, and we try to imagine a company where everybody would be proud and passionate about working there. And then we came up, who would not work for a better future? So this became our motto. And whatever we do in terms of reaching a better future for all of us. And we do that together. What is our purpose? The purpose is to embrace change, inquiry, curiosity, and courage to be different in order to build a better future, again, for all of us, not just for our own company or for our own country, but for the world altogether. And being different takes a lot of courage. And it takes a lot of action. So we designed Fark Labs to be a transformation agent, to design a better version of the future. And we called some of our friends, and even if they have daily tasks, these people are transformation agents. These are all people who are good and comfortable, maybe in their own jobs, but they want something more, something better. And some agents are not at all comfortable with the way life is, and they want to change things for the better. So we invite everybody to work with us in that purpose and to make this change possible. We did everything about Fark Labs in-house. It is, you know, when people say it's a maker space, it literally is a maker space. We designed our own logo, we designed our own strategy plan, we designed our own music speakers all together. So Fark Labs is a colorful place, as you can see from our logo. It's very fluid. You don't have to get stuck in one square. You can always move from one square to another. It's a fluid space. So one day, maybe you are in a startup, next day you can be head of a startup, or you can move to a corporate job, or vice versa. And as you see in our logo, some parts are missing. Those are the parts we are not afraid to be missing. So the answers that we have not found today, we don't have to find today, but we are looking for it, and we are looking with the right people. So these areas are our natural development areas. What does it take to be different, to be courageous? Actually, we came up with 5 characteristics. One is persistence. Actually, those are the characteristics of a true entrepreneur. If you're not persistent in your goal, it is very hard to talk about success. Passion is another thing. I think the most valuable thing a person can have in this world is to have a job that he or she is passionate about, that he's running or she's running into it. To be working with people you love, you respect, you want to work together, that's also a very valuable asset in our world. Purpose, we all have the same purpose. We work for a better future. And progress. So we don't like to stop at one station. It's always moving. We always want to move for the better. So we have taken our traditional activities, that is what you see in the industry space. Those are all our, what we call the legacy businesses. And then we have the new dimensions. Everybody is looking at the pandemic as a negative thing. We prefer to see the pandemic as an accelerating factor towards our goals. When you look at Fark Labs mobility, this is where the industrial businesses will be moving. So the way people are moving in the world is changing. And it needs new suppliers, it needs new customers, it needs new business models maybe. So we started with the mobility aspect, but along the pandemic, we also added the life sciences aspect to our transformation dream, and also sustainable lifestyle. So these are all the three areas that Fark Labs is working towards. And so far we have Gebze, Istanbul, Paris, Seoul. Those are our centers as Fark Plus, and Detroit and Shanghai are along the way to come. For each vertical, we have defined goals and purposes. So when you look at mobility, our motto is future mobility together. So in the industrial part, we have to be excellent in our operation. We have to reach the perfect human-machine interface. We have to have the footprints. Those are all the things that we need to do in order to be good at our jobs. But the way the world is today, you need to be much better than the normally required in order to survive, in order to excel, and especially in order to design a better future. And this is how we came up with different verticals. As you see, Fark Labs' intentions are the mobility, life sciences, sustainable lifestyle, and all together is serving towards a better future together. When you look at this, so each company or each idea or each team is for us a newborn. And we are raising brilliant children in Fark Labs, regardless of their nations, regardless of their age, regardless of their gender or nationality. So, and we have also different companies around it, because we see innovation as something that it's the ability to be able to connect parts that look so different from each other. So different businesses have a lot of things to teach each other. So we combined our automotive experience with a lot of our other like social ventures or online businesses. And these businesses are learning from each other and teaching to each other. And we call that collaborative intelligence. And as you see, we have a very colorful team. And again, with the pandemic, everything accelerated. And it doesn't matter wherever you are in the world, you can be part of the Fark Labs team. So our expansion has accelerated even more. And we are very happy to see that we are not the only open ones now, that we have a lot of like-minded collaborators around the world. This is our idea with our colleagues, with our, we say, mind shareholders. We have a dream. Why do we need to wait for a heaven to die? So, and Fark Labs is our idea of actually creating our own heaven on earth. So to have people around you that are like-minded, that are working for the same purpose, they value technology, they value science, and they want to create value out of it. So, and this is what we are trying to do in Fark Labs. And in light of this purpose, we try to introduce you people who think very similar and alike to us. And Angelika is one of those very esteemed people. I met Angelika about a year ago in a conference. I listened to her, and everything she said resonated so much with what we think. And we invited her to be a part of our team. And she made a very, very fast entrance. Today, she will deliver her experiences to you, and how she will also tell us how she wants to be a part of the Fark Labs team. Without further ado, Angelika.
Thank you so much, Ahu, for the kind introduction.
Welcome. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody from Vienna. I am sitting here in our apartment in Vienna. We are having the worst thunderstorm that we have had in Vienna for many years. But I guess this is also an interesting kind of, circumstance today. Without further ado, let me also kind of, share my presentation with you. Give me a second, please. So, perfect. I hope you can hopefully all kind of, see my slide deck. And I'm very happy to tell you today a little bit about my vision for the future of mobility, and also a little bit about why I personally think that it is not too late to learn from China. So you might think, why is she talking about that topic, and what actually would make her an expert, being an Austrian woman, talking about mobility in China? Well, I've actually worked all my professional life in the automotive industry, and I've also worked all my professional life either in China or for the Chinese or with the Chinese. And my last kind of professional role in the mobility sector was actually, I was the managing director for NIO in Europe, which means, I'm not sure how much you have heard about NIO, but NIO is one of the most promising Chinese global startups in the mobility space. NIO has started about 5.5 years ago with super ambitious visions, and actually NIO went public. Now it's already 1.5 years ago, but has kind of actually met all their targets that they had defined right at the beginning, going public after 4 years, raising the companies to 10,000 employees, and having 4 OEM products on the market, which is, as you might agree, not a very typical way, not the very typical base, and also not a very typical approach in the more traditional automotive industry. Again, I think kind of, as mentioned, I have worked in the industry for quite a few years, which is probably kind of, how shall I say, giving me the authority to talk about topics like that. What is probably even more important to mention is that I have deeply enjoyed the experience. So I see myself almost as a self-nominated brand ambassador, I would almost say, for what I personally like to call synergility, and this is a term that I will explain a little bit more in detail later in our discussion and talk, and also a term that I have explained quite in detail in my most recent book. But this is a very special way and approach and form how Chinese startups in the mobility space, how they grow, how they transform their businesses, and at the end of the day, how they are actually transforming the industry as such. So without further ado, I would like also to start my presentation. I will probably need about 30 to 35 minutes. We will see how it goes. And we have a Q&A session afterwards. So please, if you have questions, feel free to take a note or to send them through. I'm more than happy to answer them afterwards. So I think we are all in agreement that our industry is changing, that our industry has been changing. I mean, we have all been confronted with kind of, mega trends like autonomous driving, e-mobility, connectivity, shared mobility for many, many years. I mean, obviously over the last few years, also the topic of micro-mobility has gotten more importance. Same with kind of, urban mobility. There have been loads and loads of topics that have actually disrupted our industry already for quite a while. As Ahu has just mentioned before, and I'm in full agreement with her, COVID is an accelerator. So COVID came quite unexpected for most of us. But I mean, again, I think COVID has kind of, accelerated decisions which have probably been overdue for quite a while. COVID has accelerated kind of, transformations, has accelerated kind of, changes, which people maybe were already aware that they would need to take decisions, but then again, they couldn't or they didn't want. But in any case, kind of, COVID is accelerating and is kind of, making topics more burning, more urgent and more pressing now than they might have appeared a while ago. I share the opinion with Ahu, COVID is not a risk only. Obviously, it's a health risk. I mean, this is without any kind of, discussion. But I think speaking of the economic, speaking of the transformative power of COVID, for me, I like to look at it as an opportunity. Good news is that cards are almost being reshuffled. Obviously, kind of, COVID has brought along quite a few additional uncertainties, I would like to say. So this is about, I don't know, demand uncertainty, environmental uncertainty, external uncertainties. There are obviously quite a few more uncertainties now than companies in the mobility space or in the automotive space have actually faced before. Good news is that almost everybody is confronted with these particular uncertainties, which actually means that there is a lot of opportunity now for those who dare and for those who actually also understand how to play the game. Having spoken a little bit now about the change in the automotive industry and having explained to us a little bit how I see COVID, I obviously would like to go into China, because this is also kind of, why we're here today, because my overarching idea is to give a bit of a more understanding about kind of, how China is generally operating as a country, how kind of, what China is trying to achieve in the field of mobility, and especially kind of, how these upcoming Chinese global new entries, how they operate, how they are structured, and whether there is potentially something that we could learn from them. Speaking of China and speaking of the role of China, there is one document that I would like to introduce you, just in case you might not have heard of it before. It is called Made in China 2025. And Made in China 2025 is actually a huge manifesto. It's nothing else but a huge transformation plan for an entire nation. Those who have maybe not worked too intensively with China before, and those who might have only heard kind of some rumors or reputations, might still think that China is more of a copycat, because this is also the reputation that China had for many years. And this is also what most of the Chinese companies did. They went out, they looked for amazing technologies, copied them, and then kind of developed them further. The master plan Made in China 2025 has the ultimate vision to totally rebrand China's reputation and to totally reposition the country and to totally reform the country. It is called Made in China 2025, but the truth is this is actually a super ambitious long-term strategy, which is defining where China wants to be in the year 2049. And there is also one particular milestone which is quite important, especially for us in the world of automotive and the world of mobility, which is the year 2030. And by 2030, China has actually very clearly defined and articulated that they want to be the global leader in e-mobility and also in alternative combustion systems, generally speaking. So this is something which is very typical for China and which is also important for you to understand. Generally speaking, obviously it's always a little bit difficult with generalizations, but generally speaking, Chinese people are very, very good when it comes to strategizing. And in most of the cases, they have a very long-term vision, which is also super ambitious. So it's very rare these days that China generally wants to do an incremental innovation. They are normally having huge dreams, and they are really thinking and dreaming about transforming industries, transforming the world, conquering the world, I would almost say. So please be aware, whatever they do, I think chances are very, very high that it might fall in one or the other way in one of the long-term visions that they actually have. The second topic that is very much important to understand are actually Chinese people. Chinese people are, generally speaking, and again, this is a generalization, are quite entrepreneurial, they are quite tech savvy, and they simply like to take risks when it comes to entrepreneurship. This is also one of the reasons why there have been quite a few startups recently, obviously also in the field of mobility and generally in the automotive industry. I have defined one term, and this term, I've mentioned it before, is called synagility or synagility in English. And obviously it's a blend of kind of, two words. Sino obviously stands for China, and agility is kind of, just the shorter version of agility. I have not found any word, any term that would actually describe really well what I have perceived working for Chinese global startups and kind of, building them, scaling them globally so quickly that I thought, well, obviously there are quite a few attributes that I can list, and there are quite a few attributes that would define and explain what I have experienced, but it might also be an idea to define my own term and to make sure that this is maybe also a concept that hopefully people would understand moving forwards. So what exactly is synergility or synergility now, and how are Chinese global startups defined? So what are actually key criteria? Well, let me just start at the left upper end by also explaining a little bit with what I mean with the attributes that I have listed here. Obviously, it is about a high, ambitious vision. So this is something that we have already learned is happening not only on an organizational, managerial, individual level, but it's happening on a national level. China comes with a very clear vision. This is where we want to be, ideally in the next 10 years. And this is also kind of, this also translates in a way into a mindset where people kind of, whenever they start their businesses, they would then also not look for incremental kind of, innovations, but they then say, okay, like for example, also NIO, the founder of NIO, William Li, a very humble, super smart gentleman. I'm still very much grateful for what I have actually learned from him in regards to strategic thinking and also in regards to company planning, I would almost say. His idea was not to kind of, bring the next super cool e-vehicle to the market. His ambition was also to transform the automotive industry, to make sure that we're living in a better place at the end of the day. Quite similar actually to what Aho has just described also about heaven on earth. His vision was actually kind of blue sky coming, because living in Beijing, one day he stepped on the balcony of his apartment and he just simply realized, this is not a good place to live for me and for our family with the smog that we are having and all the problems that we are having. So I have to do something. And the interesting thing is he was not even an automotive guy. So he kind of has been in e-commerce before, but he has very clearly identified a problem, a need. He has put emotional experience first. And as you might see, this is also one of the attributes that I have listed, saying, okay, guys, we have a problem. Here is something that we have to do. And here is also something that we want actually to tackle in an emotional way, putting emotional experience first. And this is actually very, very typical for loads of Chinese startups who have started their business recently or who are starting their business these days. They come with a super ambitious long-term vision. They then execute quite dynamically, because this is also something which is very typical. As you might have heard, China is generally very famous for flexibility, agility, which is sometimes driving especially more Germanic people crazy, because the way how they normally like to plan and execute is very different. But from my experience, I have to say, and obviously also German or Germanic people or traditional Western people, they define a strategy and then they define an execution plan. From my perspective, what I have actually experienced is that Chinese people tend to put much more effort or much more emphasis, I would say, on thinking about what really is the ultimate vision, what really is their ultimate why. Why are they doing it? What problem do they want to solve? And how can they put it in a more emotional context? And then they actually execute quite dynamically, always being open for opportunities on the way. What is also quite typical is Chinese people like to think big. I mean, this is probably also very easy explainable due to the fact that the country is so huge and there are so many inhabitants. But generally speaking, whenever Chinese people start a new venture, they don't think about 5 people or 10, they think about 100 or 1,000 as a first step, so easily. So they generally think quite big. And whenever they really are convinced that they want to do something, they actually also operate at high pace and big scale, which is again sometimes easier than in some other countries because they have a huge they have manpower. So this is also this is obviously easier. Leapfrogging is another important one. I'm not sure who of you has heard about leapfrogging before, but speaking of e-mobility is a very typical example of leapfrogging, which means Chinese mobility or kind of automotive entrepreneurs have been thinking and saying, how is the industry changing? Well, there are so many people who are already strong in kind of, developing, manufacturing combustion engines. So why would we even try to catch up with them? Let's basically kind of, just simply skip that kind of, technology. Some have then decided and said, okay, let's go into hybrid, But others like NIO said, okay, let's skip the combustion engine discussion totally and jump right into e-mobility, which is obviously also something that makes their life in a way easier. Most of them don't actually have legacy or legacy businesses, which obviously comes with loads of advantages, but in some certain circumstances, it also makes life for entrepreneurs who want to have radical change easier. So e-mobility is one of the very typical examples of leapfrogging, and also one of the very typical examples that has actually allowed China and Chinese startup entrepreneurs to act very quickly and very fast. The next topic that I would like to introduce to you is innovation ecosystems. I think everybody is aware what an innovation ecosystem is. But again, speaking of China, I have to say that they are really living ecosystems in a very kind of in a good way. I'm also speaking, for example, of startup incubators or ecosystems. They have whole cities which kind of just use open source, for example, or are ecosystems for various kind of software development topics. So again, this is something which is obviously supported again by the state. So this is quite kind of a topic which is executed very well. I have spoken already about emotional experience, and I think I've also touched base a little bit on agility, which is lived in a very interesting way in China. Again, it's a certain form of flexibility, agility, but again, always kind of following and never losing sight of the super ambitious long-term vision. Chinese people like to cooperate, so you wouldn't see sole contributors too often. This is just not what they enjoy. So they like actually to work with friends. This is also quite an interesting aspect because, for example, again, I would say in more Germanic aspects, you would say, this is work, this is private. In China, it's the other way around. So it's more about kind of, I am your friend, you are my friend, this is why I want to work with you. I personally have always enjoyed it very much. So this is a very nice way of working, I find. No competence, no obstacle. This is probably also an interesting one, but this also goes back to the fact that there are loads of entrepreneurs who start their business in fields which they are not experts in. So again, speaking about some of the most promising and most famous Chinese mobility startups, most of their founders have not been in the automotive industry before. Or also talking about Alibaba, Jack Ma, he has been a teacher. So this is quite common actually, that generally speaking, Chinese entrepreneurs are very humble, but that they come from an industry which is not kind of the one where they are then actually starting their venture. That allows them actually in a way to look at needs in a more neutral and more objective way. And also they don't come with all the experiences, and I mean that under vertical commas in a negative way, which might say, okay, this is not possible, this is maybe difficult, this is difficult to kind of execute, but they look at problems sometimes in a, I would almost say naive way, with a very strong emotional focus and saying, here's a problem, we have to look into solutions, we have to look how we can change it, and we put it in a very emotional context. I have two more topics which I would like to introduce to you when it comes to agility. One is willingness to take risks. So as I've mentioned before, Chinese entrepreneurs are generally, they have a very high willingness to try new things out, and they also don't mind to fail, because this is again kind of a question of the way how they look at things. For them, learning on an individual level, learning on a collective level, is really what they want to do. They want to bring their own family, their own career, their own country forward. And this is why they say, okay, we try something. If it works out well, it's perfect. If it doesn't, then we try something else. But this is also possible because when trying something, as I mentioned before, although they have a super ambitious vision and they act quite dynamically, they would not kind of spend years and years and years of making something work. If it doesn't work after half a year, let me say, then they say, well, we have tried it, we have given it all the chances. Obviously, we have experimented, as we would today say, we have pivoted probably. Not even sure whether they know those terms, but this is more kind of probably in their blood, taking risks, trying things out, kind of doing experiments, observing very carefully whether the experiment has kind of high chances to succeed, adapting kind of things like pivoting, If it works, then full speed ahead. If it doesn't, off to the next adventure. And this is also what is kind of, summarized a little bit but by the last kind of, box on the slide, entrepreneurial euphoria and the ability to let go. Chinese entrepreneurs are generally very, I would say, emotional about their little baby. They are very kind of, into it. But then again, as I say, and this is also kind of, very different, for example, from Germany or from Austria. If an Austrian entrepreneur or a German entrepreneur starts a business, I think he would kind of, feel very much ashamed to let it go. He would probably work on it, I don't know, for 10 years, just to prove to his family and to prove to all his friends that he has made it a success, which is different in China. So they would say, it was an experiment. I have kind of, put all my eggs into one basket. I have tried to make it a success as much as I possibly could. Obviously, not the right time, not the right circumstances, off to the next. In any case, he would kind of look at it in a way that he would say it was an enormous learning experience. And now with what I have learned now, I'm off to the next, and I'm off basically to the next advance, to the next venture or advantage. So by what I have explained so far, I think it is probably now also easier to understand how China has managed to come at the forefront of the mobility industry within only kind of a few years' times. So what you can see here in this slide is actually, again, NIO's ES8, a very kind of, interesting product, a 7-seater SUV. But just taking NIO or just taking the ES8 as an example or as a role model, I would always say, looking at the macro perspective again, in 2013, there haven't been any e-cars on Chinese streets. I mean, I have personally relocated to China in 2008, and kind of thinking back how mobility looked back then, which cars were on the streets. I mean, it was totally different. And this whole topic, this whole tendency of focusing on e-mobility, focusing on autonomous driving, has literally only started a few years ago. So basically, as I said, there were no electric cars on the streets of China in 2013. And I mean, looking now, we are now in the year 2020. I think it's still kind of, confirmed globally that China is one, if not the leading country when it comes to e-mobility. And again, asking the question, how was that possible? I would like to go back again to the last slides that I have shown you. I think it's essentially a combination of two forces. It is really the state coming with a very, very ambitious and very clearly defined and articulated long-term vision, which also obviously comes with subsidies, comes with kind of, state-funded incubation centers and kind of, startup, whatever initiatives. So this is something that we really kind of have to say. This is probably easier in China than it would be in some or in most of the countries. But then again, we also have to give them credit. They do that in a very, very efficient way. And on the other hand, as I said, it's basically two forces coming together. It's really Chinese people who are generally tech savvy, who want to try out new things, who come with a certain positive pragmatism, and to just generally say, let's give it a try. So speaking about COVID, how has China actually kind of mastered the difficulties that were kind of brought along with COVID? Well, I guess as we all know, China has been hit by coronavirus earlier than kind of Turkey or Austria has. So also from that perspective, they have obviously been ahead of the curve. Just speaking kind of timeline. That has obviously also helped them because kind of the fact that coronavirus has hit them earlier has it also made easier to kind of come out of the pandemic a bit earlier kind of than we did. So that was probably an advantage that they had. However, I mean, they have been hit quite badly, as you probably have heard, especially also in February. Automotive sales went down to 20%. So, I mean, I think that was the lowest point they have had for many, many, many years. So it was actually quite a difficult situation. On the other hand, I have to say the timing was again probably not bad for them because, as you might know, obviously China is working corresponding to the Western calendar. But whenever it comes to kind of religious or kind of religious festivals, a moon festival or whatever, they are still going back to the old moon calendar. So in that particular circumstance, they were quite lucky, because when they had the lowest moment in time, it was actually Chinese New Year. So that means they wouldn't have kind of, produced anyway. And they had quite a lot of their kind of, manufacturing work, blue collar workers, or generally kind of, quite a lot of the workers in their home cities celebrating New Year's with their families, which was an advantage, but then again a disadvantage, because they all wanted to come back at the same time to basically the industrial hubs in order to resume production. One topic that I have also just reviewed yesterday, I'm reading an international study that McKinsey has carried out, looking into different countries and seeing how they have recovered or how they are currently recovering from COVID. China was ranking very high again, and I was not surprised at all when it came to innovation. So basically one of the core topics that Chinese entrepreneurs, Chinese automotive leaders did right after COVID arrived, they have kind of accepted the situation for what it is. And this is also what I like to, to describe almost as a kind of China spirit every now and then. It is a very kind of pragmatic, positive attitude to things and to change. Because again, comparing kind of a situation again to the more traditional German or Western automotive industry, I have perceived that quite some companies they have almost been traumatized for many weeks, which I obviously, don't get me wrong, which I totally understand. But it has been for many weeks kind of, how many people will we need to lay off? How many people will we need to furlough? Will we need to close down some of our subsidiaries? So it was, the focus one was more on, oh my God, this is a drama. Oh my God, we have a problem. This is a crisis. How will we survive? China came with a very different mindset. So they basically said, okay, we have a problem. It is again this kind of very pragmatic optimism, I would say, or we can also call it the other way around, optimistic pragmatism. Basically saying, okay, we have a problem, but we have to live with that. That doesn't mean by any means that we would change our long-term vision. Maybe this is a way to focus even more on innovation. Maybe this is a way to focus even more on innovative business models, on innovative revenue models, taking into account that obviously kind of, customer behavior is changing. So maybe this is a way, loads of kind of, Chinese OEMs and also kind of startups, they have, I think after a few days only, they have invested money in broadcasting kind of, sales pitches and putting together, I don't know, new kind of, broadcast shows, because they found out, okay, the traditional way of selling a car doesn't work any longer, or at least doesn't work at the moment. So let's take the opportunity and do something different. I think also some of the companies in Europe or in kind of, in other regions have done that, adding or expanding their product portfolio almost immediately. In China, this was very normal. So basically, I think there were, again, 3 factors that I have observed, and they are quite similar, or I would say they have been factors that I have observed before, and they have helped China in actually getting at the forefront of the mobility industry. But I think it were the same factors or similar factors that are also helping them to strengthen their position during and after COVID. One is simply Chinese people are quick. And I'm obviously, again, this is a generalization. I'm not kind of referring now to state-owned Chinese companies, which are obviously kind of operating in a different way than super dynamic and quick startups. But again, speaking about tendencies and speaking about generalizations on a quite top level, I think China is quite famous for their pace. They reacted quickly. They reacted also, again, in a very agile way. And what is also kind of, quite interesting to observe is resilience. And resilience is actually, as I said, is nothing complicated. Resilience is actually a mindset, I would almost say. This is exactly kind of this ability to look at problems or challenges and say, okay, this is what has happened. This is not good. But there is also no reason about complaining too much. We have to see what we can get out of it. And it's also this entrepreneurial hunger, I would almost say, to say, maybe this is even a chance to make more money. So generally speaking, they like to make money, and wherever they can find an entrepreneurial opportunity, they will jump on it. And again, if it doesn't work out, then they jump on the next. But speaking also again about collective intelligence and kind of, collective experiences. This is something where I would say they are very good, because again, with each and every single step, at the end of the day, they're coming closer to their overarching target of being a global leader in the mobility industry, and in just being, or by just being positive and pragmatic. I think they are actually also very efficient, I have to say. So, what are actually the key learnings so far? There is one topic which I think I have kind of, explained quite a bit already, but I still would like kind of, to emphasize it again. It is really the role of leadership and long-term strategy. And when I say long-term strategy, again, I am talking about an emotional strategy. And this is also something that I think, and that I would also recommend to most of the businesses now globally, to re-evaluate their strategy. And to re-evaluate their strategy based on the current situation, like really kind of something that the Chinese also do in a very well way, is situation sensing. They do that on a regular basis. So for example, when I still was with NIO, we had it at the beginning of each and every of our executive leadership meetings, that we really said, okay, where are we really? So where are we now? Has something changed? Not kind of thinking about where would we like to be, but where are we? What are really our circumstances at the moment? And then kind of, so taking that into account, and then kind of re-evaluating what is actually the value added that we can to bring, and then again, what exactly is the problem that we want to solve? What exactly is the problem that we want to solve? Will there be people who will be willing to pay for that? And again, how can we put that into a very emotional context? And again, how can we radically put the client into the focus of everything that we are doing? So this is what I mean when I say long-term strategy. Speaking of leadership, there are also two aspects. Speaking of leadership, what I have already kind of explained before, and I think if you have not worked with the Chinese before, I can only kind of, remind you to be aware, Chinese people are excellent when it comes to strategy. And there is probably only, or there are probably only very rare things that they would do, which would not be linked in one or the other way into their kind of long-term strategic plan. So even if you might not see the link at the moment, I would be almost 100% sure that there is a link, because this is just the way, this is just in their blood. This is just in their blood. The second aspect of leadership that I would like to highlight is that I am personally convinced that there are two sets of leadership tools and two different leadership styles which work under certainty or under uncertainty. Speaking of certainty, I would say this is probably again what the more traditional automotive industry has perceived for many years. It is a highly structured industry, as we all know. It's about processes, it's about standards. You have a way how you can plan. This is something which has actually required I would say a very kind of managerial leadership style, a very managerial leadership style. I think one thing is probably new to many, but this is something that we have to accept. Uncertainty is our new norm. So I think it would be naive to think that in the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 months, things would turn back to where they have been before. Personally, I think if they would ever turn back, then it will take us at least 2 years until we would be back at the numbers where we have been before, or also kind of, at the standards and circumstances. But generally speaking, I think this was obviously kind of, a major crisis or a major kind of an event that has hit us all. I think there will be various kind of, other kind of, let me say, moments also coming in over the next few years, which will disrupt our business again in one or the other way. So I think we would all be very well advised to, again, do it as the Chinese do. Apply actually a very kind of, pragmatic, optimistic way and say, okay, this is a new time, comes with new circumstances, uncertainty is the new norm, so let's lead in a more entrepreneurial way. And I think this is exactly a key differentiator or a key difference. In the past and under traditional circumstances, I think a more managerial leadership role was probably right to apply. In a more kind of uncertain and especially uncertain international context. It's more about an entrepreneurial leadership style. So what does that again mean? That means, as we have discussed before, I think it's very advisable to re-elevate the long-term vision, but to have a long-term vision that you also as a person are happy with, a long-term vision which comes with emotional factors, where you can really identify and clearly identify a problem which needs solving and kind of, put it in a very emotional context. But then again, it is about experimenting, it is about pivoting, it is about kind of, the willingness to learn and the willingness to learn quickly. Because also one topic that I am convinced about, there have been many discussions, both in theory and also kind of in managerial practice, about what are actually core competences, what are core advantages. And I'm actually convinced that in times of uncertainty, the most important advantage is basically quick learning. So learning at high pace, being able to kind of adapt your organizational structures, being to adapt kind of what you're doing in a very agile way is what will make you not only survive, but what will make you strive in future. The second topic that I would like to reiterate or basically reinforce again is the role of innovation. And as you might see here, I've kind of written it in a slightly different way, which is also the role of synovation. And synovation is a term which is very famous. And synovation was actually also, how should I say, one of the reasons why I created my term synagility, because when I was still with NIO and when I was also the spokesperson for Europe, I have been invited to deliver loads and loads of talks and kind of keynotes at various conferences, and I was very often invited to talk about synovation, this very typical way how Chinese companies innovate. Again, that they don't want to do any kind of incremental innovation, that they want to do radical innovation, that they want to transform entire industries, that they leapfrog. So this is kind of for that particular phenomenon, I would almost say, there is a term which is called synovation. And I then realized and say, okay, there is obviously a lot of kind of research and already a lot of being written about how Chinese innovate. There hasn't been too much being written about the way how Chinese companies grow and transform. So about, I would almost say kind of, the DNA and the inner dynamics. But coming back to synovation, obviously leadership is a critical factor. Obviously strategic planning is a critical factor, but innovation, and again, it's kind of, a way of entrepreneurial innovation is just in Chinese people's bloods, I would say. And what I have actually kind of experienced is that you can find innovation on 3 levels, at least. Obviously, you can find it on many more levels if you look carefully. But speaking of people, I have really found that they almost come with some kind of an innovative DNA, I would almost like to say. So again, this is the way how they look at things. It is again this positive pragmatism that I have mentioned. Also the hunger to make money, the hunger to say, is there an entrepreneurial opportunity? What can I get out of it? Can I try? How can I improve myself? How can I put myself, my family, my career, my company forward? So this is something where I can clearly say, I've perceived loads of examples where Chinese people are generally behave in a very innovative way. That is obviously closely linked with the whole topic of mindset, but mindset also speaking of culture, how they build their companies, how they build their startups. In many companies, and that was also the case, for example, with NIO or Alibaba was started in a similar way. We didn't have job descriptions. We didn't have job descriptions for years. Not even sure whether they have job descriptions now. The idea was to hire people who come with the right values and with the right mindset, and then basically to raise at high pace and internationally a global mindset of like-minded people, a purely value-driven organization. So I think that is definitely something which is, I would almost say, a must criterion or must requirement if you really want to build a global and kind of, global, yes, but if you really want to build an agile organization, I think this is even more important. If you want that people kind of, expect that there will be change, they have to share the same values. Talking about processes, What I have actually experienced very often is that Chinese people love to think about innovative business models, but what they even love to think more about is innovative revenue models. And this is again what I have mentioned before, they just love to make money. So they generally kind of, they have a lot of fun, they enjoyed it deeply to think about, okay, what innovative revenue model could be possible to apply? How can we bundle services? How can we put kind of, topics together which might not be associated normally? So this is something which is not, I don't know, a task to them, but this is actually a joy to them. So they really kind of, enjoyed it quite deeply. And so do I. So maybe I have also kind of, lived in China and worked with them for too long, but this is really a super interesting topic, I also find. So having spoken now quite a bit about China, how they came basically through COVID, how Chinese startups are normally structured. Now, obviously also the question is, does it make sense to build bridges? How to build bridges? Are there already bridges being built maybe? Because as I mentioned, China in most of the cases comes with very kind of clearly defined and articulated long-term visions. And I mean, this is, by the way, this is a bridge in Bielefeld, Croatia. I've just taken that picture because I've just been on vacation in Croatia 2 weeks ago. But I think this is also a very typical example. This is one construction project which is actually led by the Chinese. And interesting enough, this is also done in cooperation with kind of quite a few other companies from different kind of backgrounds. Surprise, surprise, the Chinese have actually been the quickest, but it's obviously kind of an interesting project that is ongoing in that particular region. But giving you one other example, which might be even more suited for Istanbul or for kind of your particular region, is, I'm not sure how many of you have heard about China's One Belt, again, kind of strategic plan and kind of idea. If you look at kind of the map that they have drawn when it comes to both the economic and also the maritime plans that they're having, Istanbul is a hub. So I think this is definitely something which will kind of put Turkey and particularly Istanbul in an even more kind of interesting position when it comes to cooperation with China, because I mean Istanbul has a very kind of interesting kind of geopolitical and kind of geographic position anyway, but especially, for example, thinking about China's long-term vision in terms of infrastructure, and I mean it takes a bit to kind of define a link between infrastructure and mobility, but there is a link if you want. I think you're also on a very, very interesting spot in that regard. However, trying to kind of summarize what I would actually recommend you and trying to kind of wrap it up in a more simplified way. I think it is probably really important, in case you have not heard too much about China's progress in the mobility industry and primarily China's approaches and ways of operating, I would really recommend you, if you're interested, to get familiar. Always also feel free to reach out to me if you have any additional questions or if you want to learn more about that topic, because I think it is not only super interesting, but it is also worthwhile. Because again, I think China has done an amazing job in putting themselves at the forefront of the mobility revolution, both in regards to e-mobility and also kind of autonomous driving already before COVID came ahead. But I'm actually convinced that by being so resilient, proving agility again, and being fast, they have in many aspects even strengthened their position. So I think it's definitely a good idea to kind of get a bit of an understanding of what they're doing, what they have been doing, what they're planning for the next few years, because I can assure you that there are quite ambitious and also clearly articulated plans and strategies, not only to put China at the forefront of the mobility revolution by 2030, and also by 2049, as kind of Made in China 2025 defines, but there is already a new manifesto about China Standards 2035. So they have also a quite clear plan how they want to globalize, what they want to do in future, which is again linked to the One Belt initiative, which could again be linked to Istanbul. So I think that could be interesting, and many interesting business opportunities could also arise in that context. My second recommendation, as simple as it also sounds, is actually also related to that. Cooperation is key. As I have mentioned before, Chinese people like to make business with friends. They like to make business with people they trust. They like to make business with people who they feel share similar values, who are also interested in bringing the world forward, in collective intelligence, in kind of, transforming the industry. So I could only kind of, motivate you and encourage you to get in touch, to find ways on how to cooperate, whether this is more about lateral cooperations, whether this is more about investments. Chinese, as you probably know, China is a quite rich and wealthy country. Chinese people like to invest. Chinese people like the entire topic of kind of, venture capital. And because it all comes with their overarching, I don't know, tendency, I would almost say, or passion for entrepreneurship, and at the end of the day, they want to make money. So this is something that they're interested in, and if there is an interesting kind of venture, an interesting proposition, I think it would be easy to get them motivated and involved. One thing I have to mention also, and I think I've probably kind of mentioned that already before quite a few times anyway, still Chinese people always have a strategy. So as much as they like to do business with friends, you would only be their best friend if they would also kind of see, I would say, an advantage for them. This is not negative. This is just something that you have to be aware of. As much as they come with a certain pragmatism, they also come with a certain level of I would say, an opportunistic behavior in a way. Third point is, I think there are learning opportunities. Because again, and this is also kind of, how I have written and how I have kind of, structured my book is, and the name of my book is In the Year of the Tiger, Why It Is Not Too Late to Learn from China. I think they have done quite a few things right. And I think they do continue to do quite a few things right. On the one hand, it's obviously important just to understand how they think and how they operate, in case you want to operate or to collaborate with them moving forwards. But on the other hand, I think it's also probably interesting to understand what they have done in order to put their nation and basically their collective at the forefront of the mobility revolution. And one thing is really, and this is also what I would like to highlight again, is the way how they define their vision, their company's long-term vision, their ambitious kind of strategy. And this is really by reflecting, is there a need? What problem are we solving? And kind of trying to be as radical as possible by putting the end user at the ultimate focus. They like to think in ecosystems. Again, as I mentioned, they are no kind of sole contributors by nature. So they like to collaborate. They like to put kind of people together. They like to work in ecosystems. And again, I think that was definitely one of the factors that has made them so successful. They always put emotional experience first. And ultimately, and this is also kind of my last message or my last bullet point, and with that I would also like to close my presentation today, is they generally enjoy the challenge. They enjoy the entrepreneurial ride. Whether they kind of succeed or whether they fail, they will always learn something. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Angelika. That was quite a bit of information to digest.
You're welcome.
Thank you. But I have to say that the book is so to the point, and it was, after I read it, it was very clear, and I'm excited also to work with you on the second chapter of it, how we make Fark Labs as a part of this synergility and innovation. And I think we have a lot to discover. So my understanding from everything that you have just said, actually, you really need to enjoy the journey, right?
Exactly.
So it is not, we are in the automotive sector, we are very result oriented. And unless there is a clear result, we hardly move a finger.
Yeah.
And in this case is quite different. So we have to change the way we behave.
Exactly.
That's what I'm understanding by looking the tiger in the eye. What do you say about that?
Yeah, no, I can absolutely agree with you. And also kind of, I think that was probably also one reason why I have so much also enjoyed working with the Chinese, is because there was always, I don't know, I would almost say a little level of craziness, And the little kind of, for example, speaking about kind of, Chinese New Year, obviously every Chinese New Year comes with a kind of, an animal kind of, a sign of the zodiac. And I'm not sure whether you would do that in Turkey, but we would not do that here in Austria or Germany, that we as a kind of an executive leadership team would kind of, perform a dog dance in front of kind of, 10,000 employees, or kind of, a pig dance. You know what I mean? But this is again where they say, well, if we are not having fun, why are we doing it in the first place? Because I mean, as much as we want to transform the industry, and as much as we obviously want to make money and obviously come up with new products, if this is not a journey that we are enjoying ourselves, how would others
enjoy it? Exactly.
Yes.
That's how we feel at Fark Labs too. Yes, if you're not going to enjoy the process of doing things together, yes, it takes the fun out of it. Otherwise, you're always trying to reach somebody else's targets. But when you talk about, there are 4 questions, so I'm gonna also ask them to you. And maybe I can combine Carolina's question with mine as well. So she's asking about the Chinese plan for 2025, whether you could give some more insight about that plan. Their core focus points, and when it comes to development and state subventions. And what I would like to add to that is that, why do you think they put mobility into their core as a strategy?
Let me start by answering the second question first. I think, and that again probably comes with a certain level of pragmatism, because mobility is a core topic at the moment. And mobility will be a core challenge. Again, this is a problem that needs solving. Yes. And as I have also kind of, described before, Chinese people, as much as they are kind of, visionary, and as much as they are super smart, they are always opportunistic in a way. So they wouldn't start a business just for an idealistic kind of,
for fun.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So obviously kind of mobility is also basically the everything that has kind of, also the challenges that we have discussed before. We will have certain problems that need solving in the world of mobility in the future. And this is also kind of, a topic that they generally like. And also they, as a nation, they are also well equipped, I would say, because again, thinking of the topic of mobility in a way, I mean, China is very well equipped when it comes to kind of, raw material or commodities. So why would they not, if they have all these kind of, resources in their own country, or, also with the countries they're collaborating with, if they have all these resources, why would they not use it? So this is basically a little bit of the way of thinking. On the one hand, there is a problem that needs solving. This is also a topic where we as a company, as a nation, are quite well equipped and prepared. So why not kind of, also position ourselves in that regard? This is why I would say.
And about the 2025 plan?
Yeah. So it's called Made in China 2025. And basically, I mean, as you probably know, China has been going through loads of reforms, I would say almost over the last 40 years. So China has been going through huge transformations now for quite a while. And I think they have done an amazing job, but they have still not caught up with where they actually really wanted to be. Like, I mean, they are really striving for global leadership in certain aspects. And kind of, what they realized, and this is also something which is quite common, they don't only want to kind of, have clear visions, but they articulate the visions very, very clearly. So they normally kind of, write documents or manifestos then, which are a base and which are also easy to understand for all the employees, for everybody who is part of the ecosystem. So that was one of the reasons why they said, okay, we need, again, coming with a certain pragmatism, we need to have a clear think. Where do we want to be in the future? What do we need to do? Let's write it down. And they called it Made in China 2025, only because actually the year 2025 was quite near, but it is actually a long-term vision defining where China wants to be in the year 2049. And this is, because this is generally also kind of an important milestone in their history, So basically, the next really relevant milestone is 2030 when it comes to mobility, because this is exactly what they said. They have managed quite, I think they have done an amazing job in getting at the forefront of mobility, but they haven't really globalized yet. So again,
Yes.
if you look at, for example, NIO, or if you look at some other comparable kind of, Chinese startups, whether this is mobility or not, they have, obviously their kind of expansion strategies have also been slowed down a bit by coronavirus, because they would have, some of them would have started this year, and they might now only start next year or the year after. But kind of, what this master plan or this manifesto also describes is that over the last few years, they have managed to, first and foremost, totally change their nation's reputation. Kind of, they over the last few years, there have been loads of expatriates like myself in China, helping them also kind of, to improve technologies, helping them to also kind of, scale up to a certain extent. And now they say, okay, now we feel well equipped. For the next few years, we will then slowly start, and slowly again inverted commas for Chinese standards, we will start to go global. So I'm sure, again, the coronavirus has kind of slowed down the whole thing a bit this year, but I'm sure you will see more and more kind of Chinese companies coming into the Western world in the next few years. So the plan is, that by 2030, they will be clearly recognized as the global leader, and they will also be global.
Okay. So you still believe, because it's also among the questions, the tension that is brought by the coronavirus and the political tensions, and, do you think that will slow down the internationalization efforts of the Chinese companies, or they will also be able to overcome this obstacle as well and reach the target that you just mentioned?
Both. I think it will slow down efforts, because again, like for example, there are quite a few companies that I also kind of know quite well. They have had plans to come into Europe this year. So like for example, the idea was actually that with Geneva Auto Show, they would present kind of their products, and then kind of gradually over the next few weeks and months, they would announce the next activities. This is obviously not happening this year, and this is probably also not happening next year. But this is again something that will not change their long-term strategy at all. This is something that they will probably see again as kind of, dynamic execution, and saying, okay, then we probably do it 1 or 2 years later. But in the meantime, we focus on our core strengths back home in China, and we maybe even kind of rethink and optimize what we wanted to do, and maybe kind of even adapt it more to the new circumstances. So yes, it will slow down a bit, but no, it won't change their kind of long-term vision.
Yeah, okay, they'll stay on course. Yes. So moving to a micromobility question, and being a micromobility enthusiast and a recent member of the DACT's, Fark Labs Micromobility Initiative, DACT's advisory member, Rohit is asking, micromobility players have been financing their fleet through equity or debt financing. So do you think, please share if there are any new technology enabled financing or leasing models for these players? Because obviously Rohit must be feeling that this cannot go on like that. The expansion that is expected from these companies, it's very hard for them to finance themselves through traditional models. Yeah, so what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. I think this is also, this is a super interesting kind of, question, and also super interesting topic. I'm personally not an expert in that, but from what I have also learned over the last few weeks, I think also that industry will need new kind of, models, new creative kind of, products, and a new, more creative way of structuring deals. So I think we will also see quite some innovation in that regard. We will have to, because generally speaking, investor behavior has also become more conservative, and kind of, some of the ways how kind of, that topic has kind of, operated and worked in the past doesn't work at the moment. So there will there will be a need to kind of, come up with more kind of, creative and new tools and structures.
Yes, and maybe even finding different parts of the problem to solve, rather than going for what everybody is trying to solve. Maybe exactly. Also a creative approach. Exactly. Yeah.
And again, also creative approach, as you say, by again kind of building corporations, by kind of also figuring out how could one help the other. there is also one aspect. I mean, as I've mentioned, there are loads of Chinese companies who want to go global, and this is not only the Chinese OEMs. There are loads of kind of Chinese suppliers who want to go global, and I think that would be one very good advice, or could be a very good way to kind of find a Chinese supplier who wants to go to Europe, and kind of find a way and say, okay, let's say for example, I support you, you support me. You might have kind of more financial power at the moment, so why don't you kind of support us financially, but on the other hand kind of we help you build your presence in Europe moving forwards, or in the Middle East.
Yes, so constraints may create more collaboration opportunities. Also, moving on to Dagobert Hartmann's question. Excuse me. This is the, all right, sorry. Dagobert's question, he wants to know also some of your experiences on international collaboration at NIO between Chinese, US, and European companies. Like, what are some good cases of collaboration that you have seen, and what does not work? And is there something that you can tell us to tell me, like, don't ever do it with the Chinese when you work with them?
Well, don't be pessimistic and don't be slow. I would say, to start with, because this would just not go with their kind of very general mindset. Chinese people are quite humble, so this is also kind of really interesting. So I mean, as much as they want to transform the world, or transform the industry and conquer the world, on a personal level, they are quite humble. So I think what would probably not work too well on a personal level is telling them I'm Superwoman and I know everything. I mean, I'm overdrawing the picture now, but basically this is nothing that they would find appealing. So in that regard, it's more kind of, how can you help me? How can I help you? And how, again, can we find a cooperation? Well, speaking of NIO, I think what NIO has done really well is, I mean, we have actually kind of, started a Chinese global startup within 1 year. So kind of, the company as such was officially incorporated in November 2014. They have operationally started in March 2015. I have started in May 2015, so I was one of the first employees. And then obviously on the executive board for Europe. So I have been the one kind of incorporating NIO in Germany, and I've then after a while moved on into the UK, and I've headed up the advanced performance unit in the UK, meaning I had a race team reporting into me, the supercar department, so the quickest electric supercar back then. Meanwhile, it's one of the quickest back then. We broke quite some records on Nürburgring, and then advanced engineering. But basically, we kind of so. Obviously, the headquarter in China was incorporated. I incorporated kind of NIO GmbH Germany in June. We started NIO UK Limited in July, and we started basically our operations in Silicon Valley, that was connectivity, in October. So that was something I think that was quite exceptional. And it then took us 3.5 years or 4 years until we really kind of went public then in New York. And we had 10,000 employees by then. How did that work? Well, we had an extremely clear, again, vision. So this was something also that William Lee, the founder, actually told me on day one, where he said, well, Angelika, if you join us, you will have all the rights and all the freedom to build the operations in Europe. This is the target. In 4 years, we will go public. We will have 10,000 employees and have 4 products on the market. We have 2 chances or 2 outcomes only. If we manage, then everything is amazing. If it doesn't, then we have learned a lot. And then kind of, we will need to move on. So also when I started, I wasn't quite sure myself, is this just crazy? Or is this an enormous opportunity? But then I also thought, well, I have nothing to lose. This will definitely be one of the most steepest learning opportunities in my life. And this is also kind of, what it was. So I think, again, that also comes back to what I have also said before. You need to have like-minded people who share the same values and vision, because we all worked like dogs, but we have very much been enjoying ourselves. And you need people who understand and share the vision, because again, kind of, I was sitting in Europe basically by myself, building the European organization the way I thought it was the right way to do. And obviously I flew to Shanghai on a very regular basis to talk to the leadership there, but still I was the one sitting in Europe by myself. So that is something you have to find the right people, especially when it comes to leadership team, and they will then help you to scale.
Do you think it would have been possible if NIO was an extension of a larger corporation who wants to go into the electrical car business? Would this scenario play out the same way? Or being a startup has its own challenges, but also opportunities?
Very good question. I mean, being a startup has loads of challenges, like, for example, fundraising and kind of, there were loads of moments where we thought, okay, this is a bit difficult now. Who knows whether we will be able to pay our salaries tomorrow. So that might have been easier if we were an extension of a more established company. I would say there are pros and cons. I mean, ideally, if there is a more established company and the more established company kind of still supports the smaller one, but gives all the freedom and allows all the flexibility, then it would be ideal. Because you could kind of, you could have that as a base, in a way also maybe as a little bit, I would almost say protection. It would probably also give you a little bit more gravitas in the international environment. But important is that they wouldn't hold you back. That I think.
Yes.
Like
I also don't want to prolong the conversation that long for our listeners, but I want to come to the point of transformation, because it's a major problem for corporations who want to move forward, but then they see so many risks associated with that transformation. They're very afraid that these transformation efforts would jeopardize or negatively affect their current business. So they want to do it slowly versus fast. And what you're saying is a very fast model. So what do you tell a legacy corporation? What is the best way? You gave some hints, like create small enterprises and then leave them free so that you limit your downside risk. That's one. I think Haier has also a Chinese company, has a good model. Exactly. But I think it's a major problem also with Turkish companies, with European companies, as a talent officer. What is advice?
I think you can't and you shouldn't even try to change everybody at the same time, because obviously in many cases kind of the legacy business are still the ones who are profitable, and they come with a certain resistance in many ways, but they have, I mean, again, in many ways they are the ones who are even financing the younger ones, I have to say.
Yes.
So this is something that we have to be transparent and fair about. What I really like is kind of, also, for example, this model of the so-called glass house, where you say kind of, take a few people, even if, from the existing team, but the ones who want to do things differently, the ones who want to change, the ones who want to transform, take them out, give them limited kind of, budget, but give them all the freedom that they have and let them do. So I would almost really do that in parallel, because that helps on the one hand, the new starters to have, again, the freedom to experiment. But on the other hand, the legacy businesses, they don't feel threatened, but they can kind of, observe and over time say, it's actually interesting what they're doing. And ideally we can learn something from it. And ideally we kind of, we can play back and we can kind of, feed back what kind of, the new companies have done or have produced. So I think this is one model which is actually quite pragmatic. And actually, from what I have seen so far, this is also something that you guys are doing very well when it comes to Fark clubs, isn't it?
Yes, actually, that's what I also wanted to ask you, because a lot of the people are asking me, like, how do you gather all these people that one is sitting in Vienna, one is in China, one is there, around the same concept without lengthy descriptions and things like that. That's why I wanted to ask you. At the beginning, I presented my version of Fark Labs. From what you have heard and based on your experience, what is your version of the Fark Labs story?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I think that the story generally, or your vision, is super cool, which is also kind of, the reason why I'm super happy that I am involved in one or the other way and that I am part of the advisory board. I think it actually kind of, the setup is quite unique and super cool, because you have very successful legacy businesses, but then at the same time, you come with a super kind of, ambitious vision of where you want to be, what you want to do, especially internationally. with kind of, all, whether this is now Seoul or kind of, Paris or kind of, Shanghai or Detroit, what you want to do. So you want to, on the one hand, you also want to have a global footprint, but on the other hand, you have also this very emotional vision. And this is what we said, it's important not only about having a functional vision, it's important of having an emotional vision. And what you are kind of dreaming of having this earth or heaven on earth, making it a better place for everybody, is very integrative in a way. Mm-hmm. And kind of, having a startup incubator, nurturing all the little companies besides. I think this is super cool. If you manage to kind of really get all these learnings from the little companies back into the legacy companies, I mean, then it's actually ideal, because this will be a win-win scenario then, I would say.
Yes, thank you. So, and then I don't want to put all the reward on female participation, but I want to ask the last question. It's a kind of a fun question. I'm not an engineer, you're not an engineer, but we are both women of automotive. What do you think about that? Do you think there is room in this world for people like us?
Well, I think obviously there is room for people like us, and if there is no room, I think then we will still raise our voices. But yeah, this is true. I think I've also made a quite unconventional career, actually, because as you say, I'm not an engineer, and especially kind of with my last kind of role, where I was, as an Austrian woman, heading up the British motorsports kind of unit of a Chinese company in the UK. That was something where people were looking at me quite often saying, how does that work? But the truth is, it worked really well. But that again comes back to what I have also tried to kind of explain before. I think this is about leadership, and this is kind of about kind of the way how you lead and the way how you communicate with people, and also the kind of the ecosystem that you create for all the people you're working with. So I can only kind of motivate, especially also young girls or generally women, whether they are engineers or not. There are so many opportunities out there, many more than ever before, and I think there are quite exciting times ahead.
Yes, and they are the opportunities for companies to recruit, actually, because they may be losing a lot of talent by overlooking the diversity that's going to come to their companies. Well, thank you very much. And I also want to thank to our viewers. I have to say that it is extremely hard when you were not, in front of me to talk to an empty screen. That was very hard. So it is much better to talk to somebody and make a conversation. I think the other Zooms, we should invite everybody and see their faces as well. I want to thank the participants for their very valuable questions, and they also started a chat around behind. So, but we would like to carry on with their questions and conversations. We invite everybody to be part of the Fark Labs conversation. Please join. We would love your valuable additions. We will distribute 50 copies of Angelika's books to some of the participants and the OEMs. And we also have a plan to do a new book, also including Fark Labs strategy, how to transform a legacy business and make it new again for a better future together. So we are working on that book as well. We would love your contributions and questions and your areas that you're having hard times in convincing your bosses, your companies, your funders. Everybody has a problem. So the more problems we can integrate, the more solutions we can offer. So thank you very much, Angelika.
Thank you
for being with us. We will be seeing much of you, I hope, and physically also in Turkey, or we will come and visit you over there, wherever you are. Have a lovely weekend.
Thank you so much, Ahu. Thank you so much for having me. And also from my side, thank you so much to all the audience. I hope you have enjoyed the event. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye.